long before stories had names, before gods were imagined, before teachers explained the world. Stones were already standing. They did not rise suddenly. They did not arrive with fire or conquest. They were placed slowly, deliberately, by hands that expected no one to remember them. Across hills, forests, and empty plains, large stones remain where they were set. Dolmens, menhirs, standing stones without symbols, without inscriptions, without explanation. They do not tell us who built them. They do not say why. They simply remain. Archaeology measures their weight, their alignment, their distance from water and sky. But the stones themselves do not respond. They hold no myths. They whisper no names. Some are arranged with care, flat stones balanced on vertical supports, creating small chambers of shadow and air. Others stand alone, tall and narrow, as if marking a place that no longer exists. Not a city, not a temple, just a point in the landscape where someone once decided. Here, there is no evidence of worship, no altars, no offerings, no signs of gods descending from the sky. Only repetition, only consistency, only patience. Whoever placed these stones understood time differently than we do. They did not build for generations. They built for silence. Many of these stones were already ancient when the first written languages appeared. Already weathered, already forgotten. Civilizations rose around them and collapsed again. Empires came and went. The stones remained. Farmers plowed fields around them. Roads curved to avoid them. Villages formed nearby, as if unconsciously respecting a memory. They no longer understood. The stones did not resist. They did not adapt. They simply stayed. Some were buried by soil and moss. Some cracked in the cold. Some were pulled down, reused, broken into walls and foundations. Yet many still stand, not because they were protected, but because they were overlooked. They were never claimed. No culture said, "These are ours." No scripture adopted them. No empire engraved its name upon them. They belong to no one. Perhaps that is why they endure. In the quiet of early morning, when mist rests low on the land, the stones seem less like monuments and more like pauses in the earth itself, places where motion stopped. They do not point upward. They do not demand attention. They do not explain the world. They simply mark that someone once existed, who did not need explanation. A people who did not write, did not conquer, did not teach. They left no stories behind, only evidence that they were here, long enough to lift stone, and then disappear. And maybe that was enough. As night returns, and the land grows still, the stones remain awake, in their own way, holding the shape of a memory that never needed words. You do not need to understand them. You only need to rest beside them, knowing that before history, before gods, before answers, there was presence. And then, quietly, there was silence. Before gods were imagined, before teachers claimed knowledge, before stories tried to explain the world, there was land. Not empty land, but land without meaning. Hills existed without purpose. Rivers moved without names. The sky passed overhead without questions. And among this quiet world, stones were lifted, not in haste, not in fear, not in worship, stone by stone, heavy, patient, placed by hands that did not expect reward. These stones were not built to speak. They were not built to warn. They were not built to guide. They were placed because someone chose a place and stopped. There are no carvings to tell us who they were, no marks to describe what they believed, no signs that they expected anyone else to come. Only the stones remain, balanced carefully, as if effort itself was the message. Dolmens rest low against the earth, flat stones held by vertical supports, creating small chambers of darkness. Not tombs, not temples, just spaces. Spaces where air moves slowly, where sound fades, where nothing is demanded. Men here stand alone, sometimes tall, sometimes barely rising from the ground. They do not point toward the sky. They do not align with stories. They simply stand. Whoever placed them understood weight, understood balance, understood patience. They did not hurry. Time was not something they feared. It was something they worked within. There is no evidence they believed in gods. No signs of divine instruction. No proof of teachers descending from elsewhere. They did not build upward. They built into the world. And then they vanished. Not suddenly, not violently, but completely. No cities followed them. No written memory preserved them. No descendants claimed their work. Only the stones remained. Where hands had once rested. Centuries passed. Then millennia. Grass grew. Forests moved. Ice came and went. Still the stones stayed. When later civilizations appeared, they found these structures already old, already silent. They did not know what they were. They only knew not to disturb them. Some tried to explain. Some tried to claim. But the stones offered nothing in return. They were not meant to be understood. As night falls, and the world becomes quieter, the stones return to what they have always been. Markers of presence without explanation. They do not ask to be remembered. They do not resist forgetting. They remain, because they were never waiting for anyone. And as your thoughts slow, you may imagine a time before questions were needed. A time when placing a stone was enough. What matters most is not how the stones were moved, but why nothing else was left behind. No paths connect them. No dwellings surround them. No traces of daily life remain nearby. Whoever placed these stones did not stay. This was not a settlement, not a gathering place, not a center. It was an act, not a beginning. The stones were set and then abandoned, not in failure, but in completion. Many stand far from fertile land, away from rivers, beyond places where survival would be easiest. This suggests intention, without necessity. They did not build where they lived. They built where they paused. Perhaps these places mattered, not because of resources, but because of stillness. A rise in the land, a break in the horizon, a place where sound behaves differently, where the wind slows, where footsteps feel heavier. These are not measurements we record, but the body remembers them. The people who placed the stones may have understood space before they understood meaning. They knew where to stop. Not everything needed to be explained. Not everything needed to continue. The stones were not messages. They were acknowledgments of land, of presence, of time passing. When later people encountered them, they felt uncertainty, not fear, not reverence, but hesitation, as if touching them would interrupt something unfinished. And so many stones were left alone, not because of belief, but because of intuition, a quiet sense that these places were already complete. As generations passed, stories tried to form around them, but the stones resisted stories. They offered no answers, only endurance. In this way, they outlasted explanation. Even now, when we measure and catalog, something remains unreachable, not hidden, just uninterested in being known. And perhaps that was the original intention, to create something that would remain, without instruction, something that could be forgotten, without being destroyed. As the night deepens, and your breathing slows, imagine hands placing a final stone. No ceremony, no words, just a moment of stillness. Then footsteps moving away, and the land returning to silence. Dolmens are not impressive from a distance. They do not rise high. They do not dominate the land. You often notice them only when you are close, when the ground dips slightly, when stone interrupts the familiar shape of the earth. They are low structures, heavy stones laid horizontally, resting on upright supports. Effort without display. They do not announce themselves. They wait. Inside a dolmen, there is very little space. Not enough to gather, not enough to live, not enough to hide, just enough to be inside. This is what makes them difficult to explain. They are not houses. They are not graves in any consistent way. They are not altars. They are enclosed emptiness. The stone roof presses downward, the side stones hold firm, and between them exists a pause in the landscape. A place where sound changes, where footsteps soften, where the outside world feels distant, even though it is only a few steps away. There is no decoration inside, no symbols carved to guide thought, no images to focus attention, only shadow, only cool air, only stillness. Whoever entered these spaces did not come to do something. They came to stop. Archaeology looks for purpose. It looks for function. It looks for repetition that explains behavior. But dolmens resist this. They appear in many regions, separated by great distances, built by people who likely never met. Yet they share a similarity that feels intentional. Low ceilings, narrow entrances, stone that absorbs sound. These are not accidental choices. They are choices that affect the body, not the mind. Inside a dolmen, time feels slower. Not because anything changes, but because nothing does. Light enters only briefly, at certain times of day, or not at all. The darkness is not threatening. It is neutral. It does not ask for belief. It does not demand meaning. It simply exists. Some dolmens were used repeatedly. Others show no signs of long-term presence. This suggests they were not destinations. They were moments. A pause during movement. A still point in a larger journey. The people who built them did not leave signs of ownership. No names. No boundaries. No warnings. Anyone could enter. Anyone could leave. And nothing followed them out. Dolmens do not project power. They do not watch the land. They do not align the sky. They turn inward. They are not about control. They are about containment. Of silence. Of weight. Of awareness. Later cultures struggled with this. They wanted dolmens to be tombs because tombs make sense. They wanted them to be shrines because shrines justify effort. But dolmens do not justify themselves. They do not reward explanation. They suggest a way of thinking that did not divide the world into sacred and ordinary. Inside a dolmen, there is no hierarchy, no above, no below, only presence. Perhaps the people who built them understood something we forgot. That not every structure needs a story. That some spaces exist only to slow the body and quiet the mind. As night deepens, imagine stepping into one. The stone is cool. The air is still. Outside, the world continues, unaware. Inside, nothing happens. And that is the point. You remain there for a moment, not waiting for anything. Then you step back out. The land is unchanged. The dolmen remains. And long after you are gone, it will still be there holding space without purpose, without memory, without need. Dolmens are easy to miss. They do not rise above the land. They do not call attention to themselves. You usually notice them only when you are close. When stone interrupts the natural shape of the ground. A flat stone resting on others. Heavy, carefully balanced. They do not look like buildings. They look like pauses. Inside a dolmen, there is very little space. Not enough for a gathering. Not enough for living. Not enough for ceremony. Only enough to enter. The air is cooler. The sound is softer. The outside world feels distant. Even though it remains only a few steps away. There are no symbols carved into the stone. No instructions. No signs of belief. Nothing tells you what to do there. That may be the point. Dolmens are not destinations. They are moments. They appear in different regions of the world. Built by people who likely never met. Yet they share the same quiet design. Low ceilings. Narrow entrances. Stone that absorbs sound. These are not accidental choices. They affect the body before the mind. Inside, time feels slower. Not because anything changes, but because nothing does. Light enters briefly, or not at all. The darkness is calm, not fearful. It does not demand meaning. It does not ask for belief. It simply allows stillness. Later cultures tried to explain dolmens. They called them tombs. They called them shrines. But dolmens resist explanation. They do not reward stories. They do not confirm ideas. They suggest a way of thinking that did not separate sacred from ordinary. A way of being, where stopping was enough. As night settles and your thoughts slow, imagine stepping inside one. The stone is cool. The air is quiet. Nothing happens. And that is exactly why it remains. There was a time when the world did not need to be understood. Not because it was simple, but because no one expected answers from it. The land existed without explanation. Hills rose and fell without meaning. Rivers moved without names. The sky passed overhead without stories attached to it. Nothing asked to be interpreted. In that world, people moved slowly, not because they were weak, but because speed had no advantage. They followed seasons, not schedules. They noticed weight, not time. They understood distance through the body, through effort, through breath. And at some point, without ceremony, they began to lift stones. Not to build shelter, not to defend territory, not to mark power. They lifted stones, as if responding to something quieter. There were no gods watching, no teachers explaining what should be done, no voices descending from the sky. Only the land itself, unchanging, patient, waiting. The stones they chose were not special. They were not polished. They were not shaped to resemble anything. They were heavy. That was enough. To lift a stone is to understand gravity. To move it is to negotiate with the earth. To place it is to accept limits. Whoever did this work knew their bodies well. They knew strain. They knew balance. They knew when to stop. The stones were not arranged to impress. They were arranged to remain. Some were laid flat, resting on others, creating low spaces where light behaved differently. Others were set upright, standing alone in open land, unprotected, and claimed. No inscriptions marked them. No symbols explained them. No warnings surrounded them. They were not signs. They were presences. And when the stones were in place, the people did not stay. This is what confuses us. There are no settlements around many of these structures. No traces of daily life. No evidence of permanence. It is as if the act of placing the stone was complete in itself. Nothing followed. The people moved on, or faded, or dissolved into something else, and the stones were left alone. Time passed in a way we no longer recognize. Grass grew around the bases. Soil gathered. Roots pressed quietly against stone. Seasons repeated. Storms came and went. Cold cracked surfaces. Heat smoothed edges. The stones accepted all of it. They did not resist change. They did not adapt. They endured. When later people encountered these stones, they felt something they could not name. Not fear, not awe, something quieter. A hesitation, as if these places had already been finished. People walked around them. Animals rested beside them. Paths curved slightly, as if without conscious choice. No one claimed them. No one remembered who had built them. And because they were unclaimed, they survived. Later, much later, when language hardened into writing, and memory demanded permanence, people tried to explain what they saw. They wanted reasons. They wanted origins. They wanted stories that moved forward. But the stones did not move forward. They stayed where they were. Some were called tombs, because tombs are understandable. Some were called temples, because effort demands purpose. But these explanations never fully settled. Too many stones stood where no one would bury the dead. Too many structures lacked signs of ritual. Too many were too simple, too quiet, too indifferent. They did not feel like answers. They felt like pauses. Imagine approaching one at dusk. The land is quiet. The air cools. Shadows lengthen. The stone does not change. It does not announce itself. It does not react to your presence. You stand near it, and for a moment, you feel something slow down inside you. Not thought, not emotion, expectation. The stone does not expect you to understand it. It does not care if you leave. It was never waiting. Some stones form small chambers, not rooms, not shelters, just enclosed spaces. You step inside. The sound of the outside world softens. The air feels still, as if held. There is nothing to see, nothing to focus on, no symbols to interpret, no direction to face. Just stone, shadow, and the weight above you. You do not feel watched. You do not feel guided. You feel contained. This is unfamiliar to us. We are used to spaces that tell us what to do, where to look, where to stand, how to behave. These spaces do none of that. They simply allow you to stop. Perhaps that was enough for the people who built them. Perhaps they lived in a world where stopping mattered. A world where movement was constant, and pausing was the only way. to notice that you existed at all. They did not need to leave records. They did not need to teach others what the stones meant. Meaning was not separate from experience. You entered, you stood, you left. Nothing followed you out. When you step away, the stone remains unchanged. It does not remember you. It does not forget you. It exists outside of memory. This may be why these stones feel older than history. History requires sequence. Before and after. Cause and effect. The stones resist this. They belong to a time when presence did not need explanation, when effort did not need reward, when something could be done and then released. As night deepens, the land becomes quieter. The stone holds the last warmth of the day. The air cools around it. Nothing moves quickly anymore. And in that stillness, it becomes easier to imagine a world without urgency, a world where no one asked what would come next, only what was here, now, and that was enough. As the night stretches further, the stones become harder to distinguish from the land itself. Edges soften, surfaces lose contrast. What once stood apart begins to blend back into the earth. This is how they were meant to exist, not as objects, but as extensions of the ground, places where the land briefly changed its mind and held still. Long ago, the people who placed these stones did not separate themselves from what surrounded them. They did not see nature as something to be used, or mastered, or corrected. They moved within it, as quietly as possible. To choose a stone was not an act of preference. It was recognition. This one can be moved. This one can rest. This one will stay. They did not carve the stone to make it obedient. They accepted its shape, its weight, its resistance. They worked with gravity, not against it. And when the work was done, they did not mark the moment. No celebration, no signal, no division between before and after. The stone was placed, and life continued elsewhere. That may be the most difficult thing for us to understand. We are accustomed to monuments that demand attention, that insist on remembrance, that try to speak across time. These stones do none of that. They do not call forward. They do not warn. They do not instruct. They remain exactly where they were set, and nothing more. In the quiet hours before sleep, this begins to feel familiar. Your thoughts slow. Connections loosen. The need to understand fades. You do not ask what the stone means. You accept that it is there. Many of these stones have witnessed everything we call history without being part of it. They stood while languages formed and dissolved. They stood while borders shifted. They stood while stories multiplied. They were never included, not because they were hidden, but because they could not be used. They offered no leverage, no authority, no promise, so they were ignored. And in being ignored, they survived. Some stones fell, some were buried, some were broken and reused by people who needed stone more than silence. But many were left untouched, not protected, just avoided, as if even those who did not understand them felt that they did not belong to the present. Imagine standing beside one now. In the dark, the world feels large again, not in scale, but in time. You become aware of how brief your presence is, not insignificant, just temporary. The stone does not compete with you. It does not diminish you. It simply reminds you that existence does not require explanation to continue. This realization does not arrive suddenly. It settles slowly, like breath finding a steady rhythm, like the body remembering how to rest. Perhaps this is why people return to these places, even now, not for answers, not for revelations, but to feel what it is like to be somewhere that does not expect anything from them. No belief, no reaction, no conclusion, only presence. The stone does not mind if you stay for a moment or for hours. It does not care if you understand it or forget it. It has already waited longer than any memory can reach. As your breathing deepens and the edge between thought and rest softens, the world becomes simpler again, not because it is explained, but because it no longer needs to be. And somewhere, in a field, on a hill, beneath trees, A stone remains exactly where it was left, unchanged, unconcerned, still. The deeper the night becomes, the less the stones feel separate from sleep itself. They do not demand attention. They do not interrupt thought. They allow the mind to drift, without pulling it in any direction. This is not emptiness. It is relief. The people who first placed these stones lived in a world that did not hurry them. Days were shaped by light and darkness, not by obligation. They did not measure progress. They measured balance. To move a stone required cooperation, not command. Hands had to agree. Bodies had to align. Effort had to be shared. This kind of work does not tolerate excess. You cannot rush it. You cannot force it. If one person moves too quickly, the stone resists. If one person pulls away, the weight shifts. Only when movement is slow and attentive does the stone allow itself to be placed. Perhaps this was the lesson. Not spoken, not taught, felt. When the stone finally rested where it belonged, there was no need to mark success. The absence of collapse was enough. The stone stayed. The land accepted it. That was all. No one remained behind to guard it. No one returned to adjust it. They trusted what they had done. This trust is unfamiliar to us. We build expecting maintenance. We record expecting correction. We leave instructions for those who come later. These people left nothing. They did not expect to be followed. In doing so, they escaped history. History requires continuity. It needs successors. It needs records. Without those, an act becomes invisible, and invisibility can be a form of survival. As centuries passed, new people entered these landscapes. They brought stories with them. They brought explanations. They brought urgency. They noticed the stones and tried to place them into their understanding. But the stones refused. They did not align neatly with calendars. They did not face predictable directions. They did not match known patterns of worship. So people hesitated. Some approached them with caution, some with curiosity, some with indifference. But few felt ownership. And because ownership never formed, destruction did not either. This is how the stones endured, not through protection, but through irrelevance. They were never useful enough to be dangerous. Over time, the world learned to move around them. Fields were planted beside them, paths bent slightly away. Homes were built at a respectful distance. The stones became part of the background, and backgrounds last longer than focal points. At night, when the world quiets, this becomes easier to feel. The mind stops searching for importance. It stops ranking moments. It allows everything to exist equally. The stone, the grass, the breath. None require justification. Perhaps this is why these places still feel different. Not mysterious, not sacred, neutral. They do not heighten emotion. They lower it. They do not stimulate thought. They slow it. You stand near one long enough, and the boundaries of attention soften. You are no longer observing the stone. You are simply nearby, and that is enough. The people who built these structures may have understood something essential, that not every human act needs to lead somewhere, that not every effort needs to change the future. Some actions exist only to be done, to lift, to place, to step away, and then to disappear. Not erased, not defeated, just finished. As the night moves forward, you may notice your thoughts becoming less defined. Images drift without forming conclusions. Memories lose their edges. This is not loss. It is return. A return to a way of experiencing the world that does not require interpretation. The stones exist in that state permanently. They do not remember their builders. They do not forget them. They exist beyond both. Time moves across them, not through them. Rain darkens their surfaces. Frost expands small fractures. Sunlight warms them slowly. All of this happens without resistance. They accept change without reacting to it. This, too, may have been understood by the people who placed them. That endurance does not come from strength, but from refusal to engage. The stone does not fight the weather, it allows it. The stone does not preserve itself, it remains. As sleep approaches, this lesson settles quietly. You do not need to hold on to thoughts. You do not need to resolve them. You can allow them to pass, without following, like clouds moving across the sky, that the stones have watched for longer than any story remembers. The world continues. Whether or not it is understood, the stones know this. They have always known it. And as the night deepens further, their silence becomes less distant and more familiar, not empty, complete. The longer the stones remain in your thoughts, the less they feel like objects, and the more they resemble moments that never ended. They do not belong to the past, in the way ruins do. Ruins speak of loss, of something broken or abandoned. These stones were never abandoned. They were completed. There is an important difference. Abandoned things carry tension. They suggest interruption. They ask what went wrong. Completed things do not ask questions. They rest. The people who placed these stones may never have thought of them as lasting. They did not build for permanence. They built for sufficiency. Enough weight, enough balance, enough stillness. Anything beyond that would have been excess. Excess invites attention. Attention invites control. Control invites change. They avoided all three. In this way, the stones escape becoming symbols. Symbols require agreement. They need to be taught, repeated, protected. These stones required none of that. They were not designed to be recognized. They were designed to be left alone over long periods of time. This decision shaped their fate. When people came later with beliefs, they found nothing to attach them to. No carvings to reinterpret. No figures to rename. No alignments that demanded reverence. The stones were too quiet to be useful, and so they endured. In many places, these stones are older than the forests around them. Trees grew, fell, returned. The stones remained. Through all of it, roots wrapped around them. Moss softened their edges. Insects nested in small fractures. Life accepted them without needing to understand them. This acceptance is rare in human structures. Most things we build resist the world. They demand maintenance. They require defense. These stones do neither. They do not oppose growth. They allow it. Perhaps the people who built them understood impermanence more deeply than we do. They did not attempt to outlast time. They simply refused to interfere with it. This creates a different kind of longevity, not one based on preservation, but on compatibility. The stones do not survive despite time. They survive within it. As the hours pass and sleep draws nearer, this idea becomes easier to feel. You no longer need to hold on to thoughts. They come and go without consequence. This mirrors the stones. They do not store memory. They do not accumulate meaning. They exist, and existence is enough. Imagine a landscape without these stones. Nothing would feel missing. Nothing would appear incomplete. And yet, once you have noticed them, their absence becomes difficult to imagine. They do not dominate the land, but they quietly anchor it. They mark places where someone once decided to stop moving. In a world of constant motion, that decision is rare. Movement is easy to explain. Stopping is not. Why stop here? Why not continue? The stones offer no answer. They suggest that the question itself may be unnecessary. The people who placed them did not ask what would come of it. They did not seek legacy. They did not seek continuity. They acted and then released the act. This release is what separates them from later civilizations. Later builders wanted to be remembered. They carved names. They stacked stone upon stone to reach the sky. They wanted height, visibility, recognition. These stones wanted none of that. They remain close to the ground. They do not rise far above it. They accept gravity rather than defy it. There is humility in this, but not submission. It is a quiet confidence, the confidence of something that does not need to prove itself. As sleep approaches, This confidence becomes contagious. You do not need to follow every thought. You do not need to resolve every idea. You can allow awareness to soften. The stones have always existed. In this softened state, they do not sharpen attention. They blur it, not into confusion, but into calm. This is why standing near them often feels grounding, not energizing, not overwhelming. Grounding. They return you to the simple fact of being present. No future demanded, no past invoked, just now. In this way, the stones are not remnants of a lost culture. They are reminders of a way of being that does not compete with time, a way of acting without clinging, a way of existing without insisting. The people who built them may not have thought of themselves as builders at all. They did not shape the world. They participated in it. They left no instructions behind because none were needed. The stones do not need caretakers. They do not need interpreters. They need only to be allowed to remain. As the night continues, your thoughts may begin to drift without direction. This is not loss of focus. It is release. You are no longer required to hold meaning together. The stones have never done so. They exist beyond explanation, beyond intention, beyond memory, and yet they feel closer. The quieter the mind becomes, as if silence itself recognizes them, as if the absence of urgency allows them to appear more clearly. Somewhere, far from cities, far from lights, a stone stands. It does not know how long it has been there. It does not know what will happen next. It does not need to. It remains. And in that remaining, it offers something rare, a model of existence, without expectation. As your breathing slows, and the line between thought and sleep begins to dissolve, this model feels less foreign. You do not need to arrive anywhere. You do not need to understand. You can simply rest in the moment, as it is, just as the stones have always done. Silence around the stones deepens with time, not because the world becomes quieter, but because attention slowly loosens its grip. At first, you notice the stone as an object, then as a place, then as something closer to a condition. Eventually, it no longer feels separate from the land, and then no longer separate from your own awareness. This is how these stones work, not through force, not through meaning, but through duration. They have existed long enough that urgency has no effect on them. Urgency is a recent habit for most of human existence. There was no reason to hurry. The people who placed these stones did not live toward a future. They lived within cycles. Day followed night. Cold followed warmth. Movement followed rest. Nothing needed to be accelerated. In such a world, the act of lifting a stone was not symbolic. It was practical in the deepest sense. It grounded the body. It aligned effort with reality. It reminded the person of their own weight in relation to the earth. This awareness does not produce ambition. It produces steadiness. When you know exactly how heavy a stone is, you do not imagine yourself larger than you are. You do not imagine the world as something to be conquered. You imagine yourself as part of it. Perhaps this is why these stones do not mark borders. They do not claim territory. They do not divide land. They occupy space without owning it. This is rare. Most human structures exist to declare something. This is ours. This is important. This must remain. These stones declare nothing. They exist without assertion. As centuries passed and people began to settle more permanently, this way of existing became unfamiliar. Structures began to rise higher. Walls became thicker. Foundations became deeper. Buildings began to separate humans from the land beneath them. Stone was no longer placed to pause movement. It was placed to stop it, to enclose, to protect, to control. In that shift, something quiet was lost. The stones we are thinking about belong to the moment before that loss. They are not the beginning of architecture. They are the end of something else. The end of a way of interacting with the world. that did not require domination. This is why they feel out of place. In later histories, they do not lead forward. They stand still, and stillness is difficult for a world that measures progress. At night, this becomes easier to understand. Progress loses relevance when there is nothing to move toward. In the dark, distance collapses, time stretches. You are no longer aware of how much remains to be done, only of what is happening now. The stones exist permanently. In this state, they do not anticipate sunrise. They do not react to sunset. They allow light and darkness to pass over them without preference. This neutrality is not indifference. It is balance. The stones do not reject meaning. They simply do not depend on it. Meaning comes and goes. The stone remains. This is why later cultures struggled to incorporate them. A thing that does not reinforce belief is difficult to maintain, so they were left aside, ignored. And in that ignoring, they were spared. Some were broken accidentally, some were moved slightly, some were buried, but many were left untouched, because touching them felt unnecessary. This feeling is subtle. It does not announce itself. You simply do not feel compelled to interfere. As sleep approaches, this same feeling arises. The need to analyze fades. The need to interpret dissolves. You are no longer compelled to follow every thought. Thoughts appear and then move on. This mirrors the experience of being near the stones. Nothing holds you. Nothing pushes you away. You are allowed to remain exactly as you are. In this state, the boundary between past and present becomes less defined. The stones are not reminders of something that happened long ago. They are reminders of something that is always available, a way of existing, without pressure, without outcome, without expectation. The people who placed them did not attempt to preserve this state. They did not codify it. They did not protect it. They trusted that it would survive on its own. And it did. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for us to still encounter it, thousands of years later, without instruction. This suggests a deep understanding that the most enduring things are those that do not require care, that what demands attention eventually collapses under it, that what allows itself to be forgotten often lasts the longest. The stones were not designed to be discovered. They were designed to be left behind. And yet, here they are, still present, still neutral, still unaffected. As your breathing slows further, you may notice that this presence feels increasingly familiar, not because you recognize the stones, but because you recognize the state they represent. A state without urgency, without demand, without direction. This is not emptiness. It is completion. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. You are not waiting for anything. You are simply here. The stones have always been here. They have watched clouds form and dissolve without comment. They have felt the weight of snow without resistance. They have warmed in the sun without attachment. They have endured not by clinging, but by allowing. This is not a lesson. It is an observation. And observations do not require belief. They only require attention. As attention softens, observation becomes effortless. You are no longer trying to understand what the stones mean. You are experiencing what they allow. Rest. Not sleep yet. Just rest. The kind of rest that comes from not needing to decide. The people who placed these stones may have rested this way often, not because life was easy, but because they did not complicate it unnecessarily. They worked. They moved. They paused. And when the pause was complete, they continued. They did not linger. They did not look back. They trusted that what was placed would remain. And it did. As the night continues, this trust settles into you as well. You do not need to monitor your thoughts. You do not need to guide them. They can move freely, like wind passing over stone. The stone does not resist the wind. It does not capture it. It allows it to pass. Then it remains. This is how the night will pass as well, quietly, without announcement. And when sleep finally arrives, It will not feel like an interruption. It will feel like continuation, just as the stones have always known. Over long stretches of time, the stones begin to teach without instruction, not by changing, but by remaining. Everything around them adapts. Plants adjust their growth. Animals adjust their paths. People adjust their expectations. The stones do not. This consistency reshapes attention. At first, it is subtle, a slight slowing, a quieting of internal movement. Then it deepens. You begin to notice how often the mind searches for purpose, even when none is required. How quickly it tries to explain, to categorize, to assign direction. The stones never do this. They exist without anticipation. This absence of anticipation creates a rare kind of stability. The people who place these stones may have lived with this stability daily, not as a philosophy, but as a condition of survival. When food depends on seasons and shelter depends on weather, there is no advantage in imagining control. You respond to what is present. You adjust. You continue. The stones reflect this approach perfectly. They do not predict. They do not prepare. They remain available to whatever arrives. Rain, snow, heat, cold. None of these are resisted. None are welcomed. They pass. This passing does not erode the stone's identity, because the stone never defined itself against them. It defined itself by being placed and then released. This release is essential. Most human actions seek continuation. They want to be reinforced, expanded, remembered. The stones did not. They were set down as if the act itself contained everything needed. No follow-up, no adjustment, no correction. This creates a kind of completeness that does not rely on outcome. And completeness without outcome is deeply calming. It removes pressure. As the night moves forward, this removal of pressure becomes increasingly noticeable. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer carry urgency. They do not demand response. They appear, hover briefly, and then dissolve. This mirrors the way weather interacts with stone. A storm may pass overhead. Rain may strike the surface. The stone does not react. It does not tense. It does not retreat. It remains. And when the storm has passed, nothing needs to be restored. The stone is already complete. Perhaps this is why these places feel restorative. Not because they add something, but because they remove unnecessary strain. They do not give energy. They remove friction. In their presence, the mind stops pushing. This effect does not rely on belief. It does not depend on understanding. It works even when unnoticed. This is why people often feel calmer near standing stones without knowing why. The effect is not dramatic. It is cumulative, a slow alignment. The people who place these stones may have known this intuitively, not as a theory, but as a physical sensation. They knew what it felt like to move weight in cooperation with gravity. They knew what it felt like to stop moving without guilt. They knew what it felt like to leave something behind without attachment. This knowledge does not translate well into language, which may explain why no language remains. Words would have complicated it. Stories would have distorted it. Better to leave nothing. And so they did. What remains is not a message, but a condition. A condition that can still be entered, not through interpretation, but through presence. As you continue listening, you may feel this presence more strongly, not because the words are doing anything, but because they are stepping aside. Allowing space. The stones do not occupy that space. They define it. They create a boundary without enclosure, a pause without interruption. This pause exists regardless of who enters it. It does not react to attention. It does not intensify. It does not fade. It remains steady. This steadiness is rare in human experience. Most things fluctuate. Emotions rise and fall. Thoughts accelerate and slow. Circumstances change. The stones do not participate in this fluctuation. They do not stabilize by force. They stabilize by refusal. Refusal to engage. Refusal to escalate. Refusal to respond. This refusal is not defensive. It is neutral. And neutrality is powerful, not in the sense of control, but in the sense of endurance. The stones endure because they do not push back. They do not resist erosion. They allow it. They do not fight time. They exist within it. As this understanding settles, your own resistance may begin to soften. You may notice how often tension arises from trying to hold something in place, trying to maintain a thought, trying to preserve a feeling, trying to anticipate an outcome. The stones do none of this. They exist without expectation. This is not passivity. It is alignment. Alignment with reality as it is, not as it should be. The people who placed these stones may have lived with this alignment constantly. They did not strive for permanence. They accepted continuity. They did not try to outlast time. They accepted being part of it. This acceptance does not erase individuality. It contextualizes it. You are not diminished by being temporary. You are clarified. The stones clarify this. They do not compete with human presence. They coexist with it. They do not demand reverence. They do not seek meaning. They do not promise anything. They simply allow. As the night continues, this allowance becomes more noticeable. You are allowed to listen without effort, allowed to drift without direction, allowed to rest without resolution. Nothing needs to be concluded. Nothing needs to be answered. The story is not moving toward a point. It is remaining, just as the stones remain. With enough time, even the idea of time begins to soften. Near the stones, it does not feel divided into before and after. It feels layered, present within itself. Moments do not replace one another. They overlap gently, like shadows at dusk. This is how the stones experience the world. They do not measure duration. They allow it. The people who placed them may have lived this way as well, not counting years, not tracking progress. They notice cycles, not accumulation. The return of light, the retreat of cold, the slow movement of animals across familiar paths. Nothing was owned. Nothing was rushed. When a stone was lifted, it was not because something was lacking. It was because something felt complete enough to pause within. This distinction matters. Most building begins with absence. Something is missing. Something must be added. These stones did not respond to lack. They responded to presence. A place that already felt whole, but asked to be marked, without being claimed. This is why the stones feel neither abandoned nor active. They exist in a state we rarely occupy anymore. Finished, but not concluded. As the night continues to deepen, your awareness may begin to drift in the same direction. Thoughts arise less sharply. They lose their edges. You may notice gaps between them, small spaces where nothing needs to happen. These spaces are not empty. They are receptive. The stones exist entirely within such space. They do not interrupt it. They shape it. A standing stone does not point toward meaning. It creates a vertical stillness that interrupts movement without blocking it. You walk around it. You notice it peripherally. It does not demand engagement. Over time, this kind of presence changes behavior. People slow without realizing why. Voices soften. Gestures become smaller. The stones do not enforce this. They invite it. This invitation has no conditions. It does not require belief. It does not require respect. It works even when unnoticed. Perhaps this is the most enduring form of influence. Not persuasion, not instruction. Environment. The stones altered the environment without dominating it. They changed how space was experienced, not how it was owned. This is why they remain compatible with every culture that followed. They did not oppose belief systems. They did not reinforce them either. They existed outside them. As centuries passed, people projected stories onto them, but the stones never confirmed any. They remained neutral surfaces, and neutrality resists erosion better than certainty. Certainty invites challenge. Neutrality invites indifference. Indifference is not neglect. It is freedom from conflict. The stones benefited from this freedom. As the night stretches on, your mind may begin to feel similar freedom. You are no longer required to decide what this story is about. You do not need to extract meaning. You can simply remain with the sound of words as they pass. Like wind passing over stone, the stone does not hold the wind. It does not follow it. It allows it to move on. Then it remains. This remaining is not passive. It is stable. Stability does not come from rigidity. It comes from compatibility. The stones were compatible with rain, with frost, with heat, with neglect. They did not need protection because they did not provoke reaction. The people who placed them may have understood this instinctively. They did not create focal points. They created background. Background lasts. Foreground changes. History remembers events. Background absorbs them. The stones are background. They have absorbed countless footsteps, countless glances, countless passing thoughts. None of these altered them. They did not accumulate significance. They did not lose it either. They remained what they were. As listening continues, you may notice your own attention becoming background as well. You are no longer focused on listening. You are simply present while listening happens. This is the same shift the stones invite. Not engagement. Presence. Presence without effort. The people who placed these stones may have rested in this state often, not because they sought calm, but because life required attunement. When survival depends on noticing subtle change, you cannot afford distraction. You learn to be present, without tension. The stones reflect this learning. They do not distract. They do not entertain. They allow. This allowance does not weaken experience. It deepens it. The longer you remain near the stones, the less they feel separate. They become part of the land's rhythm, part of the night's stillness. As your breathing settles into an even pace, you may feel that same rhythm moving through you, not imposed, not guided, simply occurring. The stones do not synchronize with you. You synchronize with them. And in that synchronization, effort fades. There is no goal. There is no destination. There is only continuation. The stones have always existed in continuation. They were placed, and then the world continued around them. They did not interrupt life. They did not redirect it. They allowed it to pass. This is why they do not feel ancient in the usual sense. Ancient things feel distant. These feel adjacent. They exist beside the present, not behind it. As the night moves on, this adjacency becomes more apparent. The past does not feel far away. It feels layered beneath now, not as memory, but as presence. The stones are not reminders. They are witnesses, but witnesses without testimony. They observed without recording. They allowed events to happen without storing them. This is another form of release. Nothing is held. Nothing is preserved. And yet, nothing is lost, because nothing was claimed in the first place. As listening continues, you may notice moments where you forget the words entirely. This is not distraction. It is absorption. The stones would approve. They do not require attention to function. They function by remaining. So do you. For now. As the hours pass, the distinction between listening and resting becomes thinner. Words no longer arrive as information. They arrive as texture, like the surface of stone under the hand, cool, steady, unchanging. The stones have always existed this way, not as messages, but as conditions. They do not communicate. They permit. This permission alters how time is felt. Near the stones, time does not move forward. It widens. Moments stretch gently, overlapping without urgency. This is not boredom. It is spaciousness. The people who lived with these stones may have experienced time similarly, not segmented into tasks, not measured by outcome. Time was not something to be spent. It was something to inhabit. When a stone was placed, it did not begin a story. It did not conclude one. It simply existed within the ongoing movement of life. This is why these stones do not feel like beginnings or endings. They feel like pauses that never resume, not interruptions or rests. Rest is not inactivity. It is alignment. The stone aligns with gravity, with weather, with change. It does not resist erosion. It incorporates it. A crack does not weaken the stone's presence. It becomes part of it. Moss does not conceal the stone. It completes it. The stone is not diminished by alteration. It is defined by acceptance. This acceptance creates durability without hardness. Hard things break. Compatible things endure. The people who placed these stones may have understood this through their bodies. They lifted weight slowly. They adjusted posture. They listened to resistance. They did not force placement. They negotiated it. This negotiation required attention, not dominance. Perhaps this is why no tools were left behind. Tools imply repetition. They imply systems. These stones do not belong to a system. Each placement was singular, responding to a specific stone, a specific place, a specific moment. Once placed, there was no need to return. This lack of return is important. It suggests trust. Trust that the stone would remain. Trust that nothing further was required. Trust that the act was complete. We struggle with this idea. We revisit. We revise. We reinforce. We fear incompletion. The stones did not. They remain exactly as they were left, and the world adapted around them. Fields grew nearby. Paths curved. Settlements formed at a distance. The stones did not compete with usefulness. They were allowed to be unnecessary, and unnecessary things are often the most enduring. They are not optimized. They are not replaced. They simply continue. As the night deepens further, this idea begins to resonate more strongly. You do not need to optimize rest. You do not need to achieve sleep. You are allowed to be unnecessary for a while. Nothing depends on your attention right now. Nothing requires resolution. The stones exist permanently in this state of non-requirement. They do not need visitors. They do not need preservation. They do not even need to be noticed. Their existence does not depend on acknowledgement. This is why they feel stable. Stability that does not rely on reinforcement cannot be taken away. The stones do not ask to be left alone. They assume it. And because they assume it, they receive it. This assumption is quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not resistance, just certainty without expression. As listening continues, you may notice that your thoughts are becoming less personal. They drift without attachment. Memories arise, but they do not demand interpretation. Images pass, but they do not insist on clarity. This mirrors the way the stones interact with perception. They do not sharpen focus. They soften it. They do not hold attention. They release it. Release is not loss. It is freedom from holding. The stones hold nothing. They do not store memory. They do not preserve intention. They exist free of accumulation. Accumulation creates weight. Weight creates strain. The stones avoid strain by avoiding accumulation. They accept weather, but they do not gather it. Rain touches them, then leaves. Snow covers them, then melts. Nothing remains. This is endurance without burden. The people who placed these stones may have lived lightly as well, not because they lacked attachment, but because attachment was unnecessary. They did not need objects to confirm their presence. They did not need monuments to validate their existence. They lived, and that was enough. The stones reflect this sufficiency. They do not extend beyond themselves. They do not gesture outward. They remain inwardly complete. As the night continues, this inward completeness becomes familiar. You do not need to extend attention outward. You do not need to seek stimulation. You can remain with what is present. Breath, sound, stillness. These are sufficient. The stones have always known this. They have never reached beyond themselves. They have never attempted to become more. They remain, and remaining, in a world that constantly moves, is a form of quiet resilience. Not defiance, not resistance. Presence. As the listening continues, presence becomes easier. You do not need to listen actively. Listening happens on its own. Just as the stones do not actively exist. They exist. And that is enough. At some point, even the idea of listening begins to dissolve. You are no longer following words. The words are simply moving past, like water around stone. This is how the stones experience the world. They are not engaged with it. They are not withdrawn from it. They are present, without participation. The people who placed them may have understood this state as natural, not something to reach, but something to return to. When effort was finished, there was nothing left to do. No review, no reflection. They did not stand back to admire what they had done. They left. Leaving was part of the act. We tend to separate creation and departure. We build, and then we stay. We watch. We protect. We explain. These people did not. They trusted that what was placed did not need supervision. This trust changed everything. Without guardians, without owners, without interpreters, the stones were free. Freedom does not make things fragile. It makes them adaptable. The stones adapted by doing nothing. They allowed rain to pass. They allowed frost to widen cracks. They allowed soil to gather. None of this threatened them. Threat requires resistance. The stones offered none. They accepted change without reacting to it. This acceptance did not erase them. It preserved them. As centuries layered over centuries, this pattern repeated. People arrived. People passed. Some noticed the stones. Some ignored them. Some wondered briefly, then moved on. Very few stayed long. The stones did not invite lingering. They did not provide answers. They provided space. Space is often misunderstood. It is not emptiness. It is permission. Permission to not fill every moment. Permission to let experience remain unshaped. The stones create this permission naturally. They do not need to teach it. They embody it. As the night continues, you may notice this permission expanding within you. You are no longer required to hold attention tightly. You are allowed to drift without losing anything. Nothing important is being said. Nothing important is being missed. The stones have existed through countless missed moments. They have not suffered for it. They have not diminished. They have remained. Remaining does not require vigilance. It requires compatibility. The stones are compatible with neglect. Neglect does not harm them because they were never dependent. They do not rely on care. They do not rely on meaning. They do not rely on presence. They exist regardless. This independence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not impress, but it lasts. As awareness continues to soften, you may feel a subtle shift, a release of the need to locate yourself within the story. You do not need to be inside it. You can be alongside it, just as people were alongside the stones. Never inside them, never owned by them, just nearby. This nearness does not demand response. It allows coexistence. The stones do not require you to understand them. They do not require you to acknowledge them. They do not require you to remember them. They remain, with or without witness. This is deeply reassuring. Nothing collapses. When attention fades, nothing disappears. When focus loosens, the stones do not vanish. When no one is looking, they do not rely on perception. They rely on gravity, on balance, on acceptance. These are stable foundations. As the night deepens further, this stability begins to feel internal. You may feel less inclined to adjust your position, less inclined to monitor your breath. Breath continues on its own. The stones never guided breath. They never guided thought. They simply allowed both. This allowance creates calm. Without instruction, you do not need to relax. Relaxation happens when effort stops. The stones stopped effort long ago. They have not resumed it since. The people who placed them likely resumed their lives elsewhere. They hunted. They moved. They rested. The stones were not the center of anything. They were not destinations. They were points of pause. Pause does not interrupt life. It clarifies it. When movement resumes after a pause, it is quieter, more deliberate, less reactive. The stones may have served this function, not by commanding pause, but by offering it, offering without insistence. As listening continues, you may feel that same offering. You do not need to stay awake. You do not need to fall asleep. Both are acceptable. The stones do not favor one state over another. They exist through day and night, without preference. They accept sunlight and darkness equally. This equality removes tension. There is no wrong state to be in. There is no correct response. You are allowed to exist exactly as you are. The stones have always existed this way. They have never corrected themselves. They have never attempted improvement. They do not seek refinement. They accept where. Where does not diminish them. It integrates them further into the world they occupy. As the night continues, your own edges may soften similarly, not disappearing, not fading, integrating. Thought blends into breath. Breath blends into sound. Sound blends into silence. The stones have always known this blending. They do not separate elements. They allow them to coexist. This coexistence does not require resolution. It requires patience. Patience without waiting. The stones are patient. Without anticipating anything, they simply remain. And remaining, without urgency, without expectation, without resistance, is enough. As the night settles even more deeply, the stones seem to recede from thought and move closer to sensation. They are no longer ideas. They are weight, temperature, stillness. The people who once walked among them likely experienced the world this way as well. Less through explanation, more through contact. The ground underfoot, the resistance of stone against the hands, the sound of wind passing through open land. These were not metaphors. They were facts. To live within facts does not require interpretation. It requires attention. And attention, when sustained gently, does not exhaust. The stones hold attention without demanding it. They do not pull awareness toward themselves. They allow awareness to settle naturally. This is why they are easy to forget and difficult to truly leave behind. Even when you are far from them, the memory of their presence does not arrive as an image. It arrives as a feeling, a sense that nothing needs to be added. That sense lingers. As centuries passed, people learned to build differently. They stacked stone higher. They enclosed space more tightly. They defined inside and outside with certainty. Walls became declarations. Roofs became separations. Architecture began to assert control. The stones we are considering belong to a moment before that shift. They do not enclose life. They allow it to pass through. Air moves freely around them. Light reaches them from all sides. Nothing is blocked. This openness is part of their endurance. They do not trap moisture. They do not create pressure. They remain balanced because they do not insist on dominance. As the night moves forward, this openness may begin to feel familiar. Your thoughts do not need to be contained. They can move freely. Nothing is being held. This is not loss of focus. It is expansion of space. The stones create space without creating emptiness. Emptiness implies absence. The stones imply sufficiency. There is enough land, enough time, enough silence. Silence does not mean nothing is happening. It means nothing is being demanded. The stones exist in silence because they have nothing to ask for. They do not seek acknowledgement. They do not wait for recognition. They were not placed to be found. They were placed to remain. Remaining does not require awareness. It requires compatibility with change. The stones have always been compatible. They accept temperature shifts without stress. They accept erosion without resistance. They accept neglect without decay. This acceptance is not passive. It is structural. They were placed in a way that allowed them to age naturally. Nothing was forced. This natural aging is part of their stability. As listening continues, you may feel less aware of how long the story has been unfolding. Time loses its markers. This is appropriate. The stones have no markers. They do not measure duration. They do not accumulate years. They exist in an ongoing present. The present does not replace itself. It continues. This continuity is soothing. You are not moving toward anything. You are not behind. You are not ahead. You are simply within. Within sound. Within stillness. Within the slow movement of night. The stones exist permanently. Within this condition, they do not resist it. They do not comment on it. They do not change it. They allow it. As the night deepens further, this allowance may feel like relief. Relief from effort. Relief from tracking. Relief from needing to respond. Nothing is asking for response. The story does not require attention. It continues regardless. Just as the stones remain, regardless of who passes by. They have witnessed countless lives. Without becoming part of them, they have watched movement. Without participating, this witnessing does not store memory. It releases it. The stones do not remember, because remembering is unnecessary. They exist beyond memory. Memory creates attachment. Attachment creates strain. The stones avoid both. They do not cling. They do not accumulate significance. They remain light, despite their weight. This paradox is part of their quiet influence. Heavy things that do not burden, present things that do not demand. As listening continues, you may notice moments where thought pauses entirely, not replaced by sleep, just paused. These pauses are not gaps. They are resting points. The stones are resting points. Within the land, you are resting points. Within time, nothing needs to move forward right now. Nothing needs to be concluded. The story does not approach an ending. It simply continues, as the stones have always done. As the night reaches its deepest point, even the idea of continuation begins to soften. Nothing needs to keep going anymore. The stones do not notice this moment. They do not mark it. They do not change their way of being. They never anticipated an ending. They were never moving toward one. They remain, as they always have, outside of beginnings and conclusions. This is their final quiet truth. Not that they are eternal, but that they do not concern themselves with duration at all. They exist where time slows enough to stop asking questions. The people who placed these stones understood this instinctively. They did not expect permanence. They did not fear disappearance. They accepted that everything placed would eventually return to the same state from which it came. Stone to earth, earth to silence. This was not loss. It was completion. Completion does not require memory. It does not require witnesses. It does not require explanation. It simply rests. The stones rest in this way. They do not hold the past. They do not guard meaning. They allow everything to pass through them. Wind, rain, light, darkness, without resistance. And because they resist nothing, nothing presses against them. This is why they feel calm. Not because they are strong, but because they are finished. Finished does not mean ended. It means nothing more is required. As you rest here now, listening without effort, you may feel this same sense of completion, settling gently. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to understand. The story no longer moves forward. It no longer needs to. Like the stones, it simply remains present for as long as it is needed. And then, without announcement, it releases itself. The stones do not say goodbye. They never did. They do not mark absence. They do not react to departure. They remain exactly as they are. Whether someone is nearby or far away, sleep arrives in the same way. Not as an event, not as a transition, but as a gentle settling into what has always been there. You do not enter sleep. You allow yourself to stop holding wakefulness. The stones have always lived in this state of release. They do not cling to daylight. They do not resist night. They allow both. As your breathing slows and the space between thoughts widens, nothing needs to be done. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be finished. The stones are still standing somewhere, quietly, without asking anything of the world. And you are allowed to rest in the same way, without effort, without direction, without expectation. Just as the stones do, silence deepens, awareness softens, and everything continues exactly as it should.